Okay, today we are on our week 7 of distance learning. Our topic today is about introduction to statistics. We basically made it. We are starting the final unit of Algebra 2. This unit will be all about statistics and how we analyze a set of data, how we collect it in order to make predictions and conclusions. We depend on data. Data means just a set of information or multiple simple informations when they are collected. It's called data. About the final unit assessment, your final unit assessment will be designing a statistical study and presenting that to your teacher, your findings in a written form and also in audio record format. The detail would be given in the next week, how you are doing your final project. Okay. So first of all, what is statistics? Statistics is just a branch of maths or a branch of mathematics. It is about collecting, organizing, analyzing data, and making predictions and conclusions from the data you collected. This is all about what statistics mean. Okay, next, what is a statistical question? When we conduct a statistics, we should have a statistical question. That is a question that can be answered by collecting and summarizing multiple information. Any question is not a statistical question. For a question to be a statistical question, you have to answer it using collected and summarized information. Okay, that makes a statistical question different from other questions. Okay, let's take example. Is the following question a statistical question? Why or why not? For instance, we ask James, during which months did your family take a vacation? This is not a statistical question. Since you don't need to collect data, what you need is just to answer it by asking James. So this is not a statistical question. Let's see what type of questions are statistical. Look, the first one, say, how many families take vacation in each month? To answer this question, you need to collect data by asking each family and recording in order to answer it. So without collecting and having multiple information, you can't answer how many families take vacation in each month. Or what month has the most birthdays of students at our school? This is also a statistical question, because you need to collect some multiple information. Either you need to go to record office and check the birth dates of each student and then tally that, and which month will have the highest number of birthdays. You can answer it through that. So this is a statistical question. Let's consider these two questions. Are you going to prom? How many students will go to prom? The first one is not a statistical question. It's just a simple answer, whether you are asking a person, are you going or not going? But how many students will go? How many students will go to prom? This needs an answer by collecting multiple information, by asking, going around and collecting and knowing it. So this is a statistical question. Okay. So vocabularies are necessary. So today, most of the time, we are building our vocabulary around statistics. The first two vocabs are population and sample. When we say population in statistics, all the members or totality of a set under consideration, but sample is some part or portion of that population. Okay, these are the first two. But having said this, a parameter is a measure that describes a population. When we are talking about population, the measure we use is named as just parameter. But when you are talking about a sample, the measure is named or described as a statistic. If you are talking, for instance, the mean value of a population, that mean value is supposed to be called parameter. But if you are talking about the mean, median, or mode of a sample, those are called statistic. These are just statistical vocabs. Let's see about variables. Look at the two columns. In the first column, you see height, shoe size, hair length, study time, distance traveled, and so on. On the second one, you see favorite animal, favorite color, favorite season, favorite sport, favorite Black Sabbath album. Okay, what is the difference between the left column and the right column? As you see, in the first column, you need some measurement. You are to measuring. But in the second one, it is a qualitative data or variable. Okay, so the first one is quantitative variable. The second one is qualitative. When you say quantitative variable, measurement is required. You need to measure the quantities. These are things that can be counted, added, subtracted, etc. For instance, you measure height, you measure shoe size or hair length, and you count the study time. This is quantitative, but you don't measure favorable animal or favorite color. Okay, quantitative, measuring with quantities that are to be measured. Qualitative variables differ based on qualities. These are not something you measure, but data that fall into categories based on the qualities of the choices. So they are called qualitative. Say in the second column, what you have seen was favorite animal, favorite color, favorite sport. You are not measuring this, but just they are preferences, they are choices, they are qualitative, categorical data. Okay. Now we go to how can we study or how can we make a statistical study. If we have a statistical question to study about, how do we perform it? There are three ways. We'll discuss those. Observational. The first one is observational. In an observational study, you measure or observe members of a sample in such a way that they are not affected by the study. So without their knowledge, without their awareness, you are performing. The first type of study in statistics is called observational. For instance, how many shoppers bring their own bags? You don't have to tell them you are considering whether they brought shopping bags to the shop or not. You just can stand aside and count that. Okay. Or how many customers order a cold iced coffee? When they order cold iced coffee, you just tally this observational study. How many times do students get on their cell phone during class? Without their knowledge, the teacher can have a tally beside him or beside her and then tally it. So this is called observational study. The second type is experiment. An experiment involves applying a treatment to some group or groups and measuring the effects of the treatments. So you differentiate the sample you are going to experiment. For instance, does music help students to better in class? So if you want to study this, you are just making a kind of survey or a kind of study before that, just experiment. You give music to a certain group of students and check their result and leave the others without. So in experimental study, those treated groups or treated samples are called experimental or treatment samples, and you can leave the other group with no treatment and see the difference. Those who got music or who listen to music when they study, does that help them or not, compared to those who are not using music? Okay. How does having a live animal in class affect the class? productivity, and the culture. This can be done, say, you can have different samples classes with live animals in the class and the classes without, and then you compare that. The treatment or experimental class would be the class where you have live animals in class, and the other class without live animals is called control group, and then you compare the two. This kind of experimental. The third way of measure study in statistical study is survey, a sample survey. A sample survey asks every member of a sample the same set of questions and records the answer. So this is about asking the members of the sample the same question and then record that. For instance, if you want what class do you reassess in most often, you can ask students about that. How many movies are you going to see in theaters this summer? Yeah, you can ask and survey and record that. How many days per week do you eat school lunch? Okay, so survey, a sample survey is asking member of a sample the same set of questions and recording the answers. Okay, these are the main statistical study types, as you remember it. The first one was observational, by observing and recording what you observed. The other one is experiment, performing an experiment. The third one is sample survey. Okay. How many students will go to prom when you say, for instance, the Highline Public School student as a whole can be considered like population, and then you consider from that 12th graders of Mount Rainier High School would be a sample. If all Washington students are considered to be population, Highline Public School can be maybe a sample for that. Like Washington students can be a sample for US students when US students would be a population. So this is just an example between a population and a sample. If Highline Public School is a population, the Mount Rainier High School students and then 12th graders would be a sample from that. Now, who do you actually talk to now? What we do, how we proceed, why we sample. Say, we don't need to eat an entire bag of chips to know what it tastes like or if we like it. But too small of a sample isn't good either. So you take considerable amount to check whether the bag of chips is really tastes good or you like it or you don't like. So sample is taken. So you don't have to. The same way, we don't need to ask every person in the school or state or country to get a sense of what is happening in the whole population. But how we determine our sample does matter. How we consider the sample. So, and the number of people we ask also does matter. Sample is very important because it is time taking with energy and money and labor if you are asking every individual of the population. So sample is very important. Okay. We know now sampling method. Essential question is how can you choose the best type of study? Okay, based on those, we can decide to answer a given statistical question and how you choose the method that gets you a reasonable sample. What are the sampling methods? What are the good way of taking sample from a population? Okay, we'll see here which method. For instance, you have a population. So a population, if you are going through, this is assume it there might be in hundreds or thousands of population here. So if you are studying each and every one, it might not be efficient. So how can we do? Which method is important? Let's see one by one the different methods of sampling we have. Stratified sampling is when a population is divided into groups with similar characteristics and the sample is randomly chosen from each group. So you are dividing the whole population. Those with similar characteristics will be categorized, and then after that you take equal number of sample from each, and then you will be studying that. This is called stratified sampling, grouping the population into similar characteristics and then taking a sample from that. Okay, stratified. Now this one, conveniency sampling. Conveniency sampling is only choosing subjects that are in close proximity or easy to get to. For instance, if I'm here, if I'm taking the whole of this population, this is convenient for me, very closer, then I take those as a sample. This is called conveniency sampling. But is it a good way of sampling? We will see later on. Because say if you are going to study about certain lake of fish, what type of fish you have in a lake, or what or how much fish you get in this lake, and taking sample only from here and decide only in that, it might not be a good sample. You have to take different places or in different ways. We'll see the advantage and disadvantage of this and others. Conveniency sampling it with proximity. Is it easy to get to? Yeah. The next one is called cluster sampling. In this cluster sampling, we divide the whole population into convenient clusters, and the entire cluster are to be considered. Entire clusters are chosen at random at the sample. So you are dividing the whole population into different clusters or groups which have the same conveniency level. Say this convenient for me to group this 1, 2, 3 together, 4, 5, 6 together, say 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then I group them according to its conveniency level where I group them. And then I'm selecting a specific cluster from each grouping, or from the same area. I take one group at random. I will take one cluster at random. This is called cluster sampling. Okay, which method again? The other one is systematic sampling. In this sampling, when you start with one member chosen at random and then use a rule. For instance, the rule might be every third member of the population to select members of the sample. For instance, if this is in hundreds or thousands of population here, I go and decide to pick the third one, the third person, every third person. Say number 3 will taken, number 6, number 9, and so on. I don't have to consider all 100 people if I have maybe only 30. If I have 1,000 people, by this every 3, when I take, it might be only 300. If I'm taking from 1,000 people every 10th person, it will be only 100 people out of 1,000 are considered as sample, like in this systematic sampling. So this is one way. The other is self-selected sampling. This is using a sample made of volunteers. Only volunteers who are willing to respond to our survey, say, are to be considered. We'll see again the advantage and disadvantage of this sampling method. So anyway, self-selected are to be considered. Okay, so when we see all the above sampling methods, some of them are not good methods of sampling. For instance, conveniency sampling is likely to get biased results due to we are asking potentially similar group of people, say, because they are convenient proximity closer to our place where we are doing the survey. For instance, if we want to survey the whole Highline Public School, even though Mount Rainier High School is a sample for that population, it's not a sufficient sample to conduct a survey. say the question of how many people will go to prom, asking only Mount Rainier High School students, 12th graders, and then generalizing it for the whole Highline Public School is not a good way of sampling, because we have to take samples from other high schools also, say Highline High School, Evergreen, so we have different high schools, so we need to take that sample. Conveniency, because we are at Mount Rainier and we are taking only from that high school, is not the best way of sampling. Say, or using full IB students to generalize to all Mount Rainier High School students is not also okay, or it's not, it will be biased. We can't generalize with specific group for the whole group because it's convenient for us. We have to take the other type of sampling methods, which we say stratified, systematic, and the other. So self-selected sampling is also likely to be biased, because we think about people who leave, say, reviews online. It was either amazing and everyone needs to know, or it was awful and nobody else should have to experience it. So such surveys are self-selected because there are specific people just leaving their comments, their review there. So it might not be the best way of generalizing. So it can't be a good survey, it can't be a good sampling method. Okay, so we have seen all the different sampling methods, a statistical question, a question that can be answered by statistical data, and different types of statistical study methods, and also statistical sampling methods. So after understanding these concepts, please go to your 7th week assignment and do that. While you do that, think about the statistical question you want to develop or study and present for your final project. Also think about which sampling method you will be using. Detail for the final project will be given next week, and so